Thanks, Nanette. Always a pleasure to be here. So what I want to talk about today is a paper entitled, Who Needs Highly Creative Advertising? How Brand Familiarity Moderates Creativity's Influence on Attention, Affect, and Memory. Now, this paper is based on a PhD from my student, Ahmed al-Shuaili, and he's currently at the University of Technology and Applied Sciences in Oman. There's also another author on the paper. He was actually Ahmed's second supervisor, and he's at the University of Waikato in New Zealand. I'm at Macquarie University in Australia. So let's go ahead and get into the paper here. Creativity, why not take the risk? Now, we frequently talk about creativity as this wonderful positive. How could you not want to take the highly creative ad? Why? It has to be good, right? If creativity is so good, why does it seem to upset and make a lot of people fearful? Okay. Still, many brand managers resist highly creative ads. And we have to think, why? Okay. Is this because there's somehow or another scaredy cats and they just can't see the higher wisdom of trying to do something creative? Well, maybe it's not just being a scaredy cat. Maybe there's some kind of wisdom here that we haven't been able to get at in some way, shape, or form. Now, probably the loudest voices I hear about hesitancy about highly creative advertising is actually coming from very well-known brands. And one of the things is it something about brand familiarity? And that's something that people really haven't looked at. Is it that brand familiarity is one of these special kinds of things that if you're already a highly familiar brand, the major one in the category, the name on the tip of everyone's tongue, maybe you don't need to be as creative. Maybe just because you're a familiar brand, people get the point. People are willing to spend time with the ad. And that's sort of the framework that we're going to come at it, that it's the highly familiar brands. These are the ones that may not need creativity. It might be something like the less known, smaller brands that need to do it. And that's what we're going to be talking about. Now, I want to introduce an idea here now called the executive functions framework. Now, this is a psychological framework for attention. Now, this is actually a pretty special kind of framework as far as I'm concerned. We have a lot of models from psychology on the way people think in some kind of deep way, but we actually don't have many about attention. And this is one of the first big ones that I've been able to find in the area of attention, trying to understand the psychology of attention. Now, in the executive functions framework, there's 3 levels, okay? So the first executive function is something called inhibition, okay? We have an ability to sort of screen out other information, concentrate on the one thing we want to concentrate on. We inhibit all other information. And in fact, when we go through ads, what we're doing is usually inhibiting the ads so we can focus on the content and the media. Then there's another thing, second function, it's called working memory. And this reinforces the inhibition so that we can really concentrate on what we want. But then there's a third level, and that's a level that's called cognitive flexibility. We're open to something new and serendipitous in some way, shape, or form. And cognitive flexibility is particularly good with new information, not old information. So those are 3 functions that we get at. Now, if you're a familiar brand, one of the things I suspect is happening is there's going to be less inhibition. People are just willing to take in the ad for the unusual, for the well-known brand. You're familiar with these leading brands. Why not spend some time with them? You might learn something useful. A brand you know nothing about, oh, the inhibition is going to be pretty strong. So cognitive flexibility, if you've got low inhibition, you might have to do that to focus on it. And that's where the creativity angle fits in. Creativity fits in with the cognitive flexibility kinds of arguments. Now, familiarity in the creative brand. One of the issues that comes up is the ad potentially incongruent with information that you already know? That is, the ad is incongruent with a well-known brand position, okay? Now, in the next slide, I'm going to show you end up with positive and negative depending on the ability to solve the incongruity, okay? That is, you're going to get to a point where the ad could actually do well. People like creative ads, we know this, but the brand may not do as well, okay? Now, this is one of these older models of thinking that I was talking about a few moments ago, and this is Mandler's model of schema congruity, value, and intensity. And this is based on the idea of either congruent or incongruent information coming in some way, shape, or form, and your value, that is your response, whether it's positive or negative, and whether or not the affect intensity is low, 0, or really high, a couple of plus signs. So if information is congruent, people tend to like that, but it's kind of a blasé kind of liking. If it's incongruent, okay, but only slightly, you can assimilate it easily. Again, you kind of like it, but it's not a really strong intensity. It's a single plus. As the intensity gets more severe, and you have to say end up accommodating that information in some way, and if you're unsuccessful at doing that, real quickly, the value is negative. You kind of don't like that, and the intensity is strong. If it's an alternative schema, okay, you can be positive, intense, but there's still this, you really have to move hard to understand it. It's unsuccessful accommodation, for example. You go positive or negative is the strongest act intensity. So you may not like it if it doesn't fit with the brand in some way, shape, or form. Okay, so here's the method. The method is 2x2 design. We got brand familiarity, high versus low, ad creativity, high versus average. It's an eye tracking study, 149 subjects. We followed up with a survey. The survey measured affect towards the ad. Did you like the ad? Everybody liked the creative ads, by the way. Affect towards the brand. That's the interesting bit. We also had a number of measures on memory. In fact, we measured about half a dozen other things. They pretty much showed the same patterns in these, so we stick with these. It was an online magazine, and the subject saw 24 two-page spreads. Okay, so let's see those spreads up on the screen at one time. Now, there were 8 creative ads, 8 control ads, and 8 distractors. Now, something that actually never came up in the review process for this paper, and I don't even think I actually put it in the paper. Those 8 highly creative ads, by the way, they also won effectiveness awards, okay? So pretty much all of them are very creative ads that for some brand was known to have worked, okay? So they've won a creativity award, I think gold in almost all the cases, and multiple gold in most cases. So they're definitely creative ads. Now, let's go through some of the results. Now, the first slide here is the attention to the whole ad, and we have seconds is on the vertical on the left. Creativity was either the control level, not very creative, high creativity. Now, the solid line that you see is when brand familiarity is low. All of a sudden, the attention jumps from 4.4 seconds all the way up to 5.2 seconds. So it's a big jump as far as you're concerned. Now, the dotted line is pretty much horizontal. There's no difference between either two when you're talking about the dotted line, which is the highly familiar brands. Okay, so if you're a small brand, this makes a huge difference. Now, let's talk about attention to the brand elements. Brand elements are sort of where the brand name is pictured in the ad, or the brand name could be on the package, or anything that or the brand symbols in some way. How much attention went to the brand elements? The dotted line that you see there is for the highly familiar brands, okay? So it's very steep, okay? Now, on the left-hand side, the control side, the dotted line is very low. You don't need that much time to recognize the leading brand. People get that real quickly. You don't need as much time. But something's going on the right-hand side of the high creativity. All of a sudden, people are staring at that ad, staring at that brand, I should say. And it's like, wait a second, is that the brand? So there's something going on here, and it's going to show up in the next few slides. Now, certainly for the low familiarity brands, the solid line, that one, yeah, it's benefiting, but the big effect is happening with the familiar brands, okay? Now, let's talk about affect towards the ad. There was an interaction here. There were straightforward effects. Ads from familiar brands were better liked. Cool. More attention, more liked. Cool. More creative, more liked. Oh gosh, this was extreme with some of the subjects. Okay, so pretty much the logic underlying affect towards the ad worked the traditional way. Everybody likes them. Okay, let's switch over now to affect towards the brand. Okay, so on the left is the score of affect towards the brand. It's a 7-point scale. And if you go to the solid line, low brand familiarity, these are the not very well-known brands. Creativity is the way in which you end up with higher levels of affect towards the brand. It's not a big increase, but it's there. All right. The big surprise, the dotted line, the highly familiar brands dropping from 5.2 to something like 4.7. This is a big drop. Okay. And remember, they were looking at the ad, looking at the brand name, thinking something. And were they thinking, oh, this is weird. I don't get this. Okay, now we go into the memory measures. More familiar brands for ad recall, more recall. Great, it was straightforward. More attention, more recall. Not particularly surprising. And again, the results aren't surprising for the ads themselves. Okay. Brand recall on the end. So this is the percentage of brand recall, free recall in the ad. The solid line, low familiar brand. Okay, that definitely improves when you're talking about moving to the creative ad. But that dotted line, again, is negative. That is, all of a sudden, people don't remember the brand as much, but they looked at it a lot more. They weren't getting this. They weren't connecting the two in some way, shape, or form. We can go to ad recognition. Now, the percents were particularly higher for that. And yes, for the creative ads, people could recognize the ad. That was great. But pretty much the creative ad gets the ad recognition for the low familiarity brands up to the level of the high familiarity brands. All of a sudden, it's an even playing field. And then the last one here, brand recognition, again, it helps with the playing field, okay? Or lower the level of the playing field with regards to those unfamiliar brands, okay? Brand recognition, yep, same pattern. Now, conclusion, creativity helped the ad. Absolutely, no questions about that one. Creativity helped unfamiliar brands. That's pretty clear. Now, it wasn't a huge effect. It wasn't as big an effect as I sort of thought it would be, but it was still there. It was still positive. The problem is creativity didn't help the highly familiar brands. People were doing the, what's that kind of stuff, trying to understand the ad, trying to understand the brand. Now, what we didn't test were moderate levels of brand familiarity. Which way are they going to go? Are they going to be somewhere in between these two effects, or will the familiar brands be like the moderate and familiar brands be like the high familiarity or low familiarity? Not sure yet. We'll have to see. What about ad interference? Okay, you got, say, a lot of clutter going on in the environment. Does that seem to make a difference? What about repetition? Repeated a few times. All of a sudden, people maybe get familiar and learn this new brand positioning. So there are a few more issues that we have to deal with, but we'll come out with the next study hopefully soon. All right. So thank you guys. I appreciate your time.